Welcome to Real Estate Radio Live, an informative and engaging podcast discussing everything you need to know about the world of real estate. Your host, Cucchiara, provides you with insight and guidance on how to buy, sell, finance, and invest in real estate. He also offers real estate tax management strategies, new construction advice, home improvement tips, and much, much more. And now, to guide you around the world of real estate, here's your host and Real Estate Radio Live team leader, Cucchiara.
Welcome in, Cucchiara with Real Estate Radio Live. Happy New Year, 2019. I think this is our third official show for 2019. And for that, most of you know, if you've been following the show, most of 2018, at least a big portion of it, Jack Russo is alongside me today. Jack, Happy New Year. Good to have you back.
Happy New Year. Have a good 2019 and beyond.
A lot of good things ahead in 2019. It is.
If the government reopens, it'll be even a bigger year.
Let's hope we don't have to count on them for everything. So most of you know, if you've been following the show, that we did a series in 2018 for at least 5 or 6 months, maybe a little more, huh?
I think we got to about 28 shows, so whatever that was.
And it was starting something new in Silicon Valley. The whole idea was all the concepts and the steps that one needs to take when you're starting a business, from, again, raising capital, having the idea, securing domain names, a lot of legal aspects around that, finding the right partners, securing insurance, financing. Boy, we touched on a lot.
We covered the waterfront, and we really covered the waterfront in a way that there's always lots of questions, and people email me questions, and I'm happy to respond to those emails. But in general, we've set the stage for what I think in 2019 can be very topical, which is growing the business. Now that you've started it, now the question is, how do you accelerate the growth? And where does the legal side come into that thinking? Because if you've set the right foundation, hopefully you've not made some mistakes, or you can fix the mistakes, or you've learned from the mistakes. But then the question is, what are the various issues that inevitably come up during the growth phase? And how do you think about structuring the growth in a way that you'll be happy by the end of the next calendar year, which is typically a fiscal year? You look at the tax return and say, wow, instead of all these losses, we actually have some gains. We actually have some income. We're actually making some money, even if we're reinvesting it. There's a lot to that. I mean, you could use all kinds of analogies. I think about the farmer or the person that, you know, when people start businesses, we've talked about this before, you could be passionate, Jack, about a service or a product or something you have an idea about, but you still have to work hard every day, and you have to be disciplined to do the things you need to do to even get to this growth stage, right? That's right, and you have to think of it as time will tell whether some of the initial ideas made sense, but you're adapting quickly based on what you're learning. So you're kind of planting seeds and watching to see which seeds sprout, which seeds go nowhere. How can you put some fertilizer on some of the seeds that are starting to actually make sense? Where can you add people that are going to make a difference? Where can you add more marketing? Where can you add more sales? Where can you add more operations? Where can you add more customer support? All of these facets of growing a business, particularly a high-tech business, become like, wow, I've really got to manage this thing, because then you've got to make the cash flows match against what are the obvious expenses, because you're pouring money into something that may take, like Amazon, many years to turn into something as big as it's turned into. But I don't think people would have thought back in the day, wow, Amazon will be this trillion-dollar company. It's become that. And I don't think anyone thinks Amazon can die, but as we said in the show last year, late last year, Bezos, who's going through, I guess the latest news is going through a personal divorce, but he said, look, Amazon may not be around forever. In fact, Amazon will die. Now, he almost couched it like the planet's going to die, too. Like, we're all going to die. But, you know, we have to put back the date of death. And that's a real negative way of thinking about it. I think of it more like you want the trajectory to grow into something bigger and better over time. So if Tesla can't make it, maybe Apple can buy Tesla. There was something in the news recently, like a prediction that some futurist made.
Interesting.
Is Apple will buy Tesla at not $4.20 a share, but $5.20 a share to say, you see, it's really worth a lot of money. And, you know, there's an argument. People are saying the future of cars is a car will be an office. And you will meet people in a car. And one of my former partners at my former law firm, we were just talking on the phone, and he said, I use Uber Pool all the time, and I can afford Uber. He said, I can afford Uber, but I use Uber Pool because I meet interesting people. And he said to me, the 10 last Uber rides in Uber Pool, which is the cheapest version of Uber, he has met 5 prospective new clients. The guy is still working. He's like in his 70s. He's going to work until, you know, he's in 100. He's got good genes. He's a hard worker. He's one of the original founders of the law firm. And he said, look, I meet interesting people. The density of interesting people in Silicon Valley is so high that he said, I don't know why Ubers don't put a whiteboard as a fixture in each of the cars and say Uber, Pool, and Meet. And charge.
Not a bad idea.
Think about that.
Almost a matching type thing, right? Match the. Yeah, it's interesting.
I'm looking for a lawyer. If you can match me up with a lawyer.
Not a bad idea.
I mean, Uber is not thinking about the potentiality of how space is used. They could put wireless Wi-Fi in the cars. They could put big screens like the screen you have behind you. These screens have dropped in price. Yeah. They can make that car into like first-class cabins. Right. People are thinking they're going to be self-driving office spaces.
It's almost, the way you describe this, it's almost a little bit like the vehicle version of WeWork.
Yes.
You know, you have this new dynamic in WeWork where people are loving that concept.
That's right. People are thinking, I want to use my time effectively. They know they're going to be in traffic. They know that even with the high occupancy vehicle lanes, the HOV diamond lanes, even with stickers and whatnot, it's still going to take time to get from point A to point B. Look, as I said many times, it's only about 30 miles between my office and your office, and it really should take a half hour in the ideal circumstance, but it often takes an hour, sometimes much longer.
I know you have an interest, I know you with a company similar, but there's a lot of thought that as things get cheaper, there won't be any need to own an automobile.
People are saying,
especially when you get older, right? Why do you, if you have a schedule and someone picks you up every Tuesday at 6 to go shopping, every Wednesday to go to the club or whatever it is, right? Why do you need a car?
And as you get older, where you don't want to be bothered with oil changes and gassing
insurance
it up and insurance. I mean, when you really add the cost per mile, most people, frankly, in Silicon Valley, don't put more than 1,000 miles a month on a car. That's why they get a lease with like $12,000 a year or $36,000 over 3 years. If you add up the cost per mile compared to spending it on an Uber or an Uber Pool, where you're actually maybe even getting new business opportunities, it's hard to argue that the car makes any sense anymore. But there are still people that like the freedom. They don't want to wait. They think waiting is the pits. They think it's the worst thing in the world. But, you know, a lawyer, a good friend of mine, is saying, you know, lawyers don't realize there's huge opportunities in meeting people in a captive setting. You're in that back seat.
I can see that.
You're in that back seat. And, you know.
Could be good or could be bad.
And he said, I meet people from China. I meet people from South America. I meet people from Mexico. He speaks fluent Spanish, so he's able to change the tune instantly, and he makes connections. And I said, you should be teaching young people. They won't even get into an Uber Pool. They feel like, oh, I got to have my own space. I'm going to use my Uber XL. They'll pay twice as much for the run.
So now you got me thinking.
Yes.
We could do interviews while people are Ubering. Right? They could call on the show, and we could be talking to them right now in the car.
There was that funny game show in New York where the guy drives and he does a game show inside the car. It's called Cash Cab or something like that. He actually holds a stack of $100 bills. It's a very funny show where he says, okay, now for $100. It's done very well in New York because at the same time they're doing publicity on, there's a good place to buy pizza. And they're charging for that embedded advertising. So they pass certain, sort of places like the equivalent of the Statue of Liberty, but obviously not the Statue of Liberty, but the Empire State Building. Notable parts of New York are all in that ride as someone's going uptown or downtown, and there's thousands of those cabs going up and down. Now, it's just his cab and his show, but that is a point that we're making about what's a strength of Uber that they probably have not recognized. A strength is they're offering a way for people to meet in an environment where they don't have to be distracted by driving. They're actually there meeting in a quiet space. Hopefully the driver doesn't have the radio on. You can ask them to turn it off or her to turn it off. And one of the things you do when you grow a business, you start taking a step back, and I'm sure the Uber board has done this and said, what are all of our strengths? Well, they've got a big group of drivers. Obviously, they might all be employees. That's a threat.
That's a threat.
Weakness,
that's true.
Right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
So this is the classic, what you learn in business school almost on day one, that you probably should learn in law school too, because if you're going to do business law, this is like how business people think. The SWOT analysis, the strengths versus weaknesses versus opportunities versus threats, SWOT, is a big part of structuring how to think about growing your business. You want to leverage your strengths, minimize your weaknesses, eliminate the threats or mitigate the threats, and then figure out what's the opportunity. So look at this opportunity that Uber has. It's a big opportunity, but they probably don't even recognize it.
So in some cases, many cases, you could be the smartest guy in the world, you could do the best business planning, have the brightest team, and you may not know that what opportunities exist until you're in the growth stage, right? Or even before that.
And you may not even in the growth stage recognize it unless you're so hands-on. Like if the CEO, and he tried to say he was the new CEO for Uber, said, I'm going to start writing and talking to drivers about what do you like, what do your customers like. He should be in Uber pool talking to customers. If he ran into my former law partner, the guy would say, this is a great, in Silicon Valley at least, probably New York City is also true, you meet interesting people because the density of talented people is so huge. And there should almost be like a flashing sign like your sign that has little conversation starters. Like, it's not a bad idea to ask someone, well, what do you do for a living? Well, I'm a lawyer. You know, I've been thinking about our company, and this was a real story he told me today. This guy's got a startup company. He's not satisfied with the lawyers that the venture capital firm has appointed for him. He's like, I think I'm ready to change law firms. He says, well, I'm with a law firm that's been in Silicon Valley almost since day one. They've been there for a long time. He's like, great, can I get your card? Then they start a conversation. Then he recognizes, oh, you're from Mexico. Let's start talking Spanish together. The speed of trust in a very intimate setting, because you're sitting as close as we are, is immense. It's an immense opportunity to make a connection, even if it's only a 20-minute ride. Of course, these days it tends to be more like a 30 or 40-minute ride. But he does this every day now. He's given up his car. He goes from his home in Palo Alto to his office in Mountain View and takes Uber, the pool version, the discounted version. It's not that expensive. It's cheaper than the cost for parking a car. And he gets chauffeured. But the beauty is he looks forward to it because he meets someone new along the route because they pick up one or two other people. It's a little bit like the way it is in Mexico with the community buses there. Yeah,
and I'll tell you the other thing you could argue, you and I know this better than anybody, is look at the loss of productivity when you're driving around in your car. I mean, you could listen to audio tapes and have phone calls, but if you're sitting in the back seat business planning or having a conversation, you can't do that really while you're driving.
No, and there are people who would say it's a better non-use of your time to not have the stress of driving. There are people that say, you know, by the time they get to work, particularly if they're doing the commute, say from San Francisco or from here to San Francisco, that can be a tough commute. You're so stressed out by all the decisions. You may have made 1,000 micro decisions that your brain has had to process. Now, maybe it makes you sharper, but there are people that get to work and they're like, you know, I kind of feel like I've already worked half a day. They're not feeling like, wow, that was a refreshing use of my time. He gets out of the car refreshed that, hey, I met a new client. I'm going to do follow-up. I'm going to potentially turn this into a big opportunity for the firm.
Actually starts the day with a great shot of energy.
It's a shot of energy. It's these people know that I'm experienced. They appreciate that I'm able to talk to them so easily. And all of a sudden it becomes like, hey, I'm still a rainmaker for this firm. I'm not too old to continue to give value to the firm. I mean, unfortunately, and this is a problem that we have with an aging population, you know, we're all living a lot longer. We're all working a lot longer. We're all hoping to be healthy a lot longer. So hopefully our health span lasts as long as our lifespan. And a lot of people are like literally still working right through their full lifespan. And there's a big pushback that's happening, particularly in law firms, where the younger people are like, why isn't that person retire, man? You know, I would be retired by now. They kind of think of it not as, hey, there's a wealth of wisdom there. Someone who's practiced 50 years, gosh, if you make that metric, I mean, for me, I'm still more than a decade away from that, just about a decade away from that. Fundamentally, that's a big marker. To get 50 years of experience practicing law, there's like less than 1% of the lawyers out there that do it. So if someone's done it, which he has, you would think there would be people clawing all over him for that wisdom. But they're like, hey, man, you got a good office. Maybe it's time to exit stage left.
What are you still working for?
Right, what are you still working for? Haven't you made enough money? And, you know, the more I think about it, it's a SWOT analysis that lawyers should do. The strengths they have are often in these lawyers. And we talked last year about this guy that's 106 and still working at a big law firm that he technically retired from 35 years ago, but they made him kind of an emeritus and said, well, there's an office for you. It's probably like a broom closet, but they gave him an office in Manhattan. So he feels a purpose. You know, he shows up with a purpose. It's like Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She's like probably so frail, but she wants to stay on the Supreme Court, at least until the next election happens. Another story there, right?
So growing the business, there's so much to this. What are some of the top 2 or 3 things you would say now we're in phase growth? We're talking about growth. Let's assume that the foundation's built. We have a model. Let's at least one model. We have an opportunity we have identified.
Yes.
What are some of the things that the company, the board, the group needs to think about on a growth stage as you begin?
So the biggest issue that creates a lot of cycles is, do you go with new employees or do you go with new contractors? That's a big... Startups are resisting hiring employees. Look at Uber. They are resisting this view that a lot of people think, hey, they have a lot of employees out there in the field, and they're saying, no way. They're all contractors, and they're trying to figure out the best ways to make that argument. And, of course, the courts seem to be going against them, and we'll see how that all shakes out. But fundamentally, for a small startup where it's just a group of people that are fundamentally operating as co-founders, that once they decide on, we're going to start doing some hiring. So now we have to decide, are we going to do it through some outsource model, or are we really just going to take on the view that we're going to grow a base of employees that we're going to manage directly, and we're going to effectively start the beginning of an HR department, even though we don't call it that yet. We call it just, well, we're hiring some people. And if you look at Microsoft, a group of people, they were like, hey, we're going to create some sort of software thing, and then they eventually lucked out and bought an operating system that turned out to be MS-DOS that became very valuable and eventually was built into Windows. They did some of their first hires with a view, we need some support staff. So I tell the story about a woman I know who was given an offer. You could be our first librarian. This idea that we need a librarian because we've got all these books. I mean, it's funny to be a computer company and actually thinking the future is all in computer, but they wanted to manage a paper library. She said, like, you sound like a startup that's going to fail. She probably would be a billionaire now because, well, we can give you some of our startup stock. And she was like, I got a safe job, man. Why would I want to be a librarian from Microsoft? And to this day, she tells the story. And she said, that was one of the turning points in my life. And it was probably one of the turning points for that group. Do we hire someone who's a professional librarian to help us organize knowledge, because we're going to be a knowledge company and we're going to have a library?
And that brings up a good point. These are the things you're going to struggle over, you're going to have dilemmas over, but you have to be careful, because you could make a case for both, right? I mean, obviously, if you look at contracting, you're probably focused more on price, keeping costs down. But then if it's a sensitive position where you're going to be face-to-face with customers that are going to rely on revenue that comes in, and you have someone that's not bought in, so to speak. That's a tough decision.
It's a tough decision, and people like to, try before they buy. So there's lots of opportunities to sort of use someone on a contract basis, often through what's called a PEO, professional employment organization.
Almost like a little lease option type.
It's almost a lease option. It's almost like, look, I really don't know if we should make this marriage happen because fundamentally the United States, California is probably not viewed as good as, say, Texas in terms of being able to use at-will termination, although California is technically an at-will state where you can have an at-will employment agreement, which means either side can say, adios, it's not working, here's my 2-week notice or whatever notice period you put in the contract or in the employment offer. But fundamentally, people worry, wow, if I take on that employee and then they don't want to leave, are they going to sue me? And that's the biggest threat that they worry about. So again, keeping the structure and the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. You have an area of opportunity. It needs more talent. Take sales, take marketing, take whatever you think. If you put more water on it, it's going to lead to more leads, which will lead to more customers, which will lead to more revenue, which will lead to more profit. They'll say, well, the threat is if I hire badly. And people, unfortunately, don't necessarily take the time or do as much what I would call screening to really find the best talent that matches the business. They'll often take, someone showed up, they responded to my ad. Wow, that resume looks great. Well, do you really know if they're suited for the job? Well, they may not be suited. They may be poorly suited.
That brings up another, I've really been trained the last couple of years, a lot of coaching that I've received and books that I've read is that you want to constantly be looking for the employee to get from another company because you've been recruiting them, eventually needing them. The thought is, Jack, a lot of people, if you're unemployed, then there's a problem. I mean, I don't mean to make a judgment there, but you know what I'm saying?
No, there's an inference. And
there's
a lot of people that will keep a deal going with the company they're exiting just so they can legitimately say, well, I'm still employed by XYZ. They may actually be on a leave of absence, or they may be suspended with or without pay, but they're technically still on the medical program or something like that. Because the inference people draw is, well, if you're out of work, then there's been a problem. Right. That's just the natural
inference. Or maybe you weren't good enough. And again, not a judgment. You never know. People are out of work for maybe but that is an issue.
Yes.
For a lot of companies and a lot of people hiring.
That's right.
Why don't you still have a job?
And there are a lot of people that will look at resumes very critically at, well, what were you doing for this 2-year period? And if someone can't say legitimately, well, I took an educational leave of absence, or I took a family leave of absence, or I was in the military, or something that can justify, then it's like, well, you just goofed off for a couple of years. So you may get sort of not as ambitious. Your ambition quotient may be lower than we require here. That's why, by the way, you see a lot of salespeople, oddly, I'll tell this story because I think there's some truth to it. Salespeople get to a certain pinnacle of their career where they hit some milestone they never thought that they would hit, and then they leave. And the people are shocked. The board is shocked. The management is shocked. That person produced, say, $5 million worth of revenue, and they might have made $1 million of commissions, and they hit their head against the wall. Well, he or she gave us notice they're leaving. They're going to take a job with this bigger company or sometimes even a smaller company. And they say, let's say if I'm on the board, they'll ask me, well, what do you think happened? I said they reached where they think the pinnacle of their potential success is here, and now they're jumping to something where they got a bigger, better commission, better stock plan, whatever they got, and they see it as, I'm taking on a new challenge where I'm going to double or triple what I made. And you see this happen. And they're leaving places that they've made a lot of money for, and they made a lot of money for themselves. And it sounds counterintuitive, but you see people in life that are like, yeah, I'm going to diversify my holdings of all these startup companies, so I leave after 2 or 3 years. And it's like, hey, they're vested 75% or 50%, and they move on to the next opportunity. And it shocks people, but it happens. It happens. So the HR function is a big one. And if the company has really looked at what the opportunities are, then they're trying to match whether it's an outsourced talent or whether it's something full-time employment or it's something in between. And managing that set of decisions is really important because you can burn a lot of money on what's called employee churn.
Right. What did you say in theory, for the most part, you're probably going to be more likely to outsource early on functions like accounting and taxes and maybe HR backroom stuff,
right,
versus maybe the face-to-face contact with a potential customer or service or product.
That's right.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people that, and you see this day with lawyers, the front desk was always viewed by law firms historically as you've got to have people you control. Why? Because they're answering the phone for your firm. Then voice recorders came in and people were like, they expect to get voicemail. And then people started saying, well, maybe we can outsource this. Now, if you look at the outsourced companies that do stuff like this for law firms, they're very much going to try to convince you that they will adapt to whatever you need.
Right.
You can modify their script. You can make them feel like it's much closer. But the reality is they're not sitting at a front desk knowing someone is there, someone is not there, someone will be in tomorrow. If you look at the management of a front desk, they really are supposed to be able to understand what's going on in the organization. Well, if the organization is now, I was in a law firm in San Francisco this morning, it's like 17 floors of lawyers. They don't know what's going on all 17 floors. There's probably 17 different receptionists on each of those different floors. Maybe they're trying to manage departments of different firms, but at some sense of size, people start wondering, does it matter? But historically, the front desk and the phone was very much an important full-time job. Now people are saying, well, maybe that's no longer true because people have direct lines and they have email. And a lot of people think millennials and younger people in business, they don't even want to do anything except by text or email.
Well, we've done some focus groups. You've done them. I've been part of them. And recently we've done some. And I tell you that the millennials and even a little bit older, they cringe at the thought of a phone call.
Scares them.
It does. Don't you dare call me. I mean, they actually get pretty personal about it.
Damn. So the Uber pool is an opportunity for them to
there you go.
Hey, I can have a face-to-face conversation because I may never have to meet this person again. If I answer the phone, I might have to answer the phone again. It's true, and we're losing some interpersonal skills as a result. But I agree with you. It's like between the robocalls and the calls people don't want to take and the family calls, you would think at some level, gosh, why do people even have phones? They have phones because they want a text message or they want to email. And I think the latest statistic is we're at 70% phone usage as a computer rather than phone usage as an audio device, maybe even closer to 80%. Now, in other countries, I think the audio is still a bigger part of the phone usage, of the mobile usage. You still people really wanting to make a connection, wanting to hear the tone of voice, wanting to understand what's going on.
So hiring people is one of the first steps, obviously, in growing, hiring the right people, whether you contract, whether they become employees, satisfying back-end stuff. I know that, obviously, you got to make sure your books are done properly. You have to make sure your taxes and revenue, all those things. What are the things that are critical kind of in the beginning growth stages, let's call it?
This employee thing is related directly to not only operations, but also the further creativity, because you would prefer employees who are creating intellectual property for your business. Contractors presumptively create intellectual property, which you have to negotiate the purchase of the IP rights. You might get a license through having the contract relationship, but you don't automatically get ownership under what's called the work made for hire rule. So on a critical function like we're going to extend the software platform, you better make sure that it's either a full-time employee or your contract relationship specifies ownership of the intellectual property. So the strength of the business, if you've done the year, sometimes two, it used to be 3 years of experimentation of what's the fit between what we have and what the market wants. There's a lot of changes that get made. You want to own all those changes because those changes actually have true value. That's what gives you the head start against the competitors. You are building something that the market wants because you're in this loop where there's a feedback from the customer. So the relationship with the customer you want to control, the relationship with the technology you want to control, that's where there's lots of opportunities that can be built on. On the flip side, there's a lot of potential for weaknesses, which is if you don't have the right loyalty to the firm, to the company, you could have that talent walk out the door with the technology. That's theft, misappropriation, litigation, or with the customers, which is also kind of potentially a form of theft. But the reality is that people have freedom to compete, and you can't get a non-compete in California, so you have to be wary about the risk of losing either customers or technology to people that you would ordinarily trust. And that's a threat. That's always a threat in the background.
What about and I know this is a struggle too, talk a little bit about when you start to grow, which are good problems to have, but then do you go out and spend, for instance, some people would say, well, if you're on that accelerated growth pattern, then how come you don't have a VP of marketing? So do you do that first? Do you wait for more growth? Do you spend the money on a vice president of marketing? I mean, those are all dollars that could be allocated early on not knowing, right?
That's right. And the typical startup that's been super well funded becomes like a bit of a drunk sailor, which is we'll press the accelerator down on everything. And then, of course, like, where'd all the money go? Well, we pumped it into this or pumped it into that. And, you know, that's dangerous because the reality is you would like to make smart decisions that say these dollars have this type of return. So there's a theory of SWOT analysis of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that says everything within a company is essentially a project. So a company in a given year, 2019, will have 100 projects. What are the projects? We're going to build a better piece of software. We're going to have more sales. We're going to have more marketing. And each of those projects has a set of tasks. And if a project doesn't have a payoff, then the argument is ditch the project. If you're doing something in marketing that you've done some experimentation and it's got no payoff, kill that project and kill it early. If that software feature doesn't lead to more revenue, kill that feature, kill support for it. And a lot of project managers literally look, and they, you know, succeed or fail around looking at projects as a company is a collection of projects, and good management is that portfolio of projects has to play together like some symphony. And the problem is you're always deciding, well, I don't have millions of dollars unless you're super well funded. I've only got a limited budget. Which of those projects should get more of that capital? And that's where good management can make good decision making. Like right now, not to go into the political scheme, there are people that are saying, boy, what's going to be proven is this $5.7 billion was a cheap price to pay for what now is probably going to be a $50 billion exercise.
For the wall, you mean?
For the wall, or the fence, or the gate, or whatever it is at this point.
Security system.
Yeah, whatever it is. I mean, you know, at some level, I'm kind of surprised that this hasn't been said. We do give a lot of aid to overseas countries. And there's an argument that $5 billion for the U.S. economy is like a yawn.
It's true.
But at the end of the day, it's become so politically weaponized that no one can talk about it with a level head. So at the end of the day, I'm sure everyone's going to look back in the history books and say, man, that was an expensive proposition.
Well, this is certainly a case.
Like project management.
Well, yeah, and you just made a case, and I think this is certainly a case where you could look at it and say, this is not about money.
No.
Right?
No.
The money, that's a ridiculous amount of money.
No, it's not a huge amount of money, but it's like, I want my Mapo. I want my Mapo. It was a cereal. And it was like the kid was always like, I want my Mapo. And that was the whole commercial, and it seems to be drilled into me. And the mother was like, you just expected to smack the kid. And that's what you expect. You expect Pelosi to just smack him at some point. You're not getting your Mapo. But at the end of the day, I hate to get political, but at some level you wonder, how is it that we're so smart as a society? We have so many smart people, and no one could sit down and say, look, in the game theory of this, there's got to be a better solution than what we
that's another
have.
Topic, too, and totally off topic. What I'll say to that is this is what keeps smart, intelligent, wonderful people out of politics.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
This very same stuff.
And that, you could say, is the bigger loss.
Yeah.
The bigger loss is we're not getting the talent.
Exactly.
So if we did the SWOT analysis on the U.S., it's got a huge and growing economy. It's got a political
Maybe we should
system.
run the government like a startup, right?
Like a startup.
Give stock options.
There you go. I mean,
piece of the action, right?
That's what was supposed to happen. We have a business guy in place. But at the end of the day, when you do a SWOT analysis, there's clearly a threat of this country going into a huge recession because of a bunch of little decisions that grow into bigger and bigger problems. And then people are out of work. And, at some level, it becomes a little bit like what's going on in Paris, the yellow jacket phenomenon of we all expect to be out of work shortly because the gas prices are going to be too high. So we're going to go to the streets and protest. And at some level, the protest becomes violent. And all of a sudden, you have the beginning of a civil war. And people don't realize that Paris and France have lost a huge amount of tourism.
Yeah.
There are people you talk to, we were planning to go to Paris for, like Valentine's Day, celebrate our love together. We're not doing that, man. We saw the protests on TV, right?
The other piece to that is, guess what? These people making decisions, they have nothing to lose. Then that's, again, the case that most Americans made, and that's the change they wanted, right? I mean, these people that are making these decisions, they're still getting paid.
Yes.
Right?
That's right.
They're making decisions based on other people's livelihood.
That's right.
So whatever happens in those decisions...
Yes. But sooner or later, someone's going to do the tally, and I'm sure the courts will eventually order compensation and overtime for all these people that are working for free, the essential workers that have to work because they're essential. But at some level, they're probably going to stop working because I don't know how many paychecks you can go before most people say, I just got to start driving Uber. Right. There's going to be a bunch of more Uber drivers.
That's a good point.
Maybe a startup that says, hey, we're like, Uber with a whiteboard. We're like a new version of this. But this strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis, I want to make one final point about it, which is to be on a board of directors means, and this is where Uber and a lot of other startups often get board members that don't do this, including Facebook, which all of the people on the board are getting sued for failing to make sure that the FTC decree that required privacy to be taken seriously at Facebook, the board was not monitoring that threat, and now they're all getting sued. It's a constant cycle between management, the board, the lawyers, the consultants, the advisors. It's a cycle of trying to do this. Let's make sure we address the threat. Let's make sure we mitigate the weakness. Let's make sure we take advantage of the opportunities and leverage our strengths. And, this whole privacy thing was there. Right. It was identified. I mean, we're talking 2011. This is 7 years ago for Facebook. And they wanted to grow their business. And they did grow the business over that 7 years. In fact, I'll give them a little bit of a plug for an ad. They just came out with a great device. It's a wonderful thing. We gave it to my mother-in-law. She's, of course, in an old age home in Texas. Facebook has this beautiful device where you can now go online and she can see you in a real video phone. And and the camera works to show her close up. So now all of her relatives can visit her online free, and she can see them.
Similar like people are watching us on Facebook.
Exactly, right? But this is like personal to her. It's called Facebook Portal. Well, there's a lot of privacy issues wrapped into that, but if you're going to get into effectively the phone business, which is what Facebook did, they're now a hardware company. It's a piece of hardware. You put it right by the phone. I've got a picture of it. I'll show it to you, where the phone is this old-fashioned phone. It might as well be an old-fashioned dial phone. It rarely gets used. And there's this big screen with this ability to see face-to-face, like instantly. And by the way, she picks it up by saying, okay, portal answer. Or,
so
hey,
it's voice
activated. She didn't even have to press the pick it up button. She can just speak the button.
Really?
So there she is, let's say 88 or soon 90 years old. I mean, she's really... there at the end of her life. She can visit with every one of her grandkids, every one of her kids. She can visit with all of her friends. I mean, it's not like she has thousands of friends, but it's like having an interactive portal to the rest of life. So what's the opportunity there for Facebook? Huge amount of telepresence in old age homes. Are they taking advantage of it?
Probably not.
Probably not. Why? Because no one is actually paying attention to how this stuff is being deployed.
So two things people need to learn today. Facebook and Uber should listen to this show because they could get some opportunities from us, right?
No, we see that because
right.
we're very entrepreneurial.
Yeah, right,
we
right.
see things.
That's right.
And the reality might be, we looked at that. That's only worth like $10 billion. We want the $100 billion business.
Yeah.
But the truth is these little tiny seeds, when they don't get picked up by the companies that could pick them up, other companies take advantage.
Well, I think, again, we're going to finish up too, but I think we should do, as we excel or we kind of expand on this, you've seen what happens in the jet business.
Yes.
And I could see this happening in the automobile business. It's kind of doing that. And what I'm point is, years ago, no one could afford jets, right? So then only the rich could afford jets. And then they came with this concept of net jets and all this, right? Yeah. So now you co-lease, you co-own, and then when you're not using it, you lease it out so you get more money on it. And now they're taking it to different levels. Now it's getting so cheap. I just looked at a program, I forgot what it was, but it's getting close to where even if you're not a millionaire, you could probably justify doing some sharing in some of these private plays.
If you have a group, particularly like we've had cases where when we're litigating and we're in some small town in South Carolina, great place, but hard to get to. And they've got a local airfield, and you can get there and save 4 hours. I mean, it's a huge, you have a group of 6 lawyers or even, say, 3 lawyers and 3 paralegals, and you say, well, we could take Delta, and then we fly to Houston, and we go from Houston, and you're like...
You get a layover, and you could get delayed, you lose your bags, right? I mean, all those things.
There's a lot of hassle. So I agree with you that the sharing economy, particularly as we get more into internet works at light speed, 5G speed, which is obviously a big topic at the CES show this week, Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, a big deal. 5G, this idea of everything gets 200 times faster.
Amazing.
So literally a download of a movie is like 2 seconds. 2-hour movie, 2 seconds, and you have it. So imagine people, you can see what this does to the airline business. We don't need movies. People are downloading in 2 seconds before the flight. It happens at the airport. All the airports will eventually be 5G. That's where it's got to go, right?
Well, before we wrap up, again, remind everybody what you do, your practice, and how they can reach you.
Managing partner at Computer Law Group in Palo Alto, and we have an office in San Francisco as well, Jack Russo. 650-327-9800 is the Palo Alto office, and I'm at J. Russo or just Jack at computerlaw.com. Happy to take your call, happy to take your question, happy to talk to you about what I've learned over the last going on 40 years of helping to grow businesses. We have a side fund that invests in early stage businesses. We obviously invest a lot of our time in it. We like to see these businesses grow. We like to see them succeed. We like to see them eventually go public.
Yeah, and guess what? We were talking about before we came on air. We were talking about resolutions, diet, and exercise, and all that.
Right.
This, quite frankly, starting a business is one of the top resolutions of a lot of people. Right. So here we are in 2019. If you're getting ready to start a business, contact Jack and the team.
Thanks, Joe. Have a happy New Year.
Yeah, you too.
Good.
All right, this is 𝗘𝘀𝘁𝗁 with Real Estate Radio Live. Thanks again for tuning in. For those that follow us on Facebook, remember, for more information, 𝗓𝗡radiolive.com. And before I forget, download the podcast. That way you can follow us anytime at your convenience. Take care. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Real Estate Radio Live. For more information on today's program, visit 𝗓𝗡radiolive.com. That's 𝗓𝗡radiolive.com. Subscribe to our podcast. Discover more at 𝗓𝗡radiolive.com.